Hello and welcome back to my studio. Today I thought I'd reshare this demo with you where I experiment with using turquoise and using salt for effects, and I'm thinking of branching out and maybe experimenting with a few more colours, and I was reminded of this demo that I hope you'll find helpful. But just before we get into the demo, just to let you know that my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner, is available now in all good bookstores, either to order now in the UK or other parts of the world to pre-order for delivery very soon. Hi and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here, and today I'm doing some more experimentation with my Cotman Turquoise. And I'm going to paint this beautiful sunset, semi-abstract painting or impressionist painting of sort of misty, overgrown countryside with distant trees and a setting sun. I'm using Arches cold-pressed paper. It's £140 weight or 300 GSM. It's taped to my board with decorator's masking tape, and today for a change, I'm going to paint with my board flat. The reason for this is that I'm going to further experiment this time and not use gravity for the painting and see how it turns out, placing the paint where I want it and not relying on gravity to sort of help to pull it down the page. So I'm wetting the board all over with my Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch modeler brush, and once enough water has soaked into the page and it's nice and wet, I'm mixing up some raw sienna first to give me that glow. I'm mixing up a fairly weak watery mixture and getting good coverage across the middle of the page where I'm hoping to have most of my sunset glow, and then adding burnt sienna into the mix to add that sort of beautiful golden hue. These two colours together, if used carefully, can really give a wonderful glow of light to your painting without being too sort of bold and in your face, if you see what I mean. Just pulling those colours up into the rest of the sky and then down into the foreground. Now a little bit of light red. This is a really fierce colour and it can drown your painting or even drown the rest of the paint on your palette if you inadvertently mix up too much. So only take a little tiny bit on the corner of your brush and mix it up, and then carefully add it into your paint and allow it to blend and mix. And you can end up with some really pretty colours. And now for my turquoise. This Cotman Turquoise is made up of phthalo blue and phthalo green, and it's got a lovely hue. It's again quite powerful, but it complements those yellows and burnt oranges perfectly. So at the moment I'm just trying to build up colour on the page in the right place, setting the scene, so to speak, for my my landscape, which is going to be quite similar to the last one that I did. I'll try and remember to link to that in the description below so you can watch that if you like. And now I'm mixing some of my indigo into my light red and introducing some darker tones. Everything sort of mixing and blending on the page. Because I'm painting wet in wet, I shouldn't end up with any hard edges from this paint application. But I'm looking for plenty of rich paint across the foreground because I'm going to be using salt to create salt effects for flowers, weeds, brambles and undergrowth in the foreground again. Some slightly darker tone across the horizon line, and then into my indigo and turquoise mixture, and carefully pulling a bit of tone across the sky while the sky is still wet, and that gives me this twilight or evening glow to the light. I'm being careful not to overbrush the turquoise and indigo with the raw and burnt sienna underneath it, because I don't really want it to turn to green. I don't mind if it's got a greenish hue, because this evening light can have that sort of uncanny sort of quality to it sometimes. I'm working quickly because all the time the washes are drying. And with an experimental approach like this, sort of more or less anything goes. As long as I keep my sky nice and plain, I can flick water into that rich paint. You can see that's causing little cauliflowers or blossoms to happen in the richer paint. And at this point, please note, I forgot to show it on camera, but I sprinkled some ordinary fine ground table salt across the foreground into the rich paint. I think you can see it already beginning to create some tiny blossoms along with the water that I flicked in. And now the next stage is to create my sun. For this, I'm taking a small coin and I'm wrapping it into a piece of paper towel, quite tightly, smoothing the edges so I get a perfect circle. And then I'm going to dip it into the damp paint, or press it onto the damp paint, lift it off, and you can see it's removed a beautiful setting sun for me, which I can go over with a damp brush and just pull over some of the paint from the sky across the sun, just to blend it in and get it looking a bit more established. I can darken that up a little bit later. And while I'm waiting for the salt to work its magic, I shall just continue to work on the background a little bit, just making some small adjustments to the tree line here and there. If you paint along with me with something as abstract and experimental as this, you'll probably have different marks, different textures, things like that. So make sure you just pay attention to your own painting and make any adjustments that you need to make, just to sort of balance things up and to kind of get those nice gentle blends which give you depth and distance. So using the corner of a chopped up plastic store card, or you could use the point of a palette knife or the end of a brush, just scratching through a few little hints and suggestions of tree trunks, and then dry brushing a bit of turquoise over the trunks to give me the impression of a few distant trees on the horizon. And then using the point of this Escoda synthetic Ultimo mop brush to pull a few clouds with my darker colour across the sun. And it's just adding a bit more tone quickly just before everything dries. I'm making sure my brush isn't wet. If my brush is wet at the moment, or wetter than the paper and the washes on it, then I will create nasty marks. With a damp brush, I'm lifting out a few little patches here and there. It's interesting to note that if you're somebody that enjoys drying your painting off with a hairdryer, that sometimes you lose a lot of the soft diffusions that you will get when you allow your paper to dry naturally. And this is what I think happens here, because over time the painting has really softened and the salt blooms have really developed beautifully. So what I did was I left it to dry overnight and then came back. And here's the result. And I think it's given me some really interesting effects and some lovely colour blends. All I need to do is use a clean dry brush and brush off any remaining scraps of salt that may not have dissolved into the paint. And I think just before I call this finished, I'm going to use a clean damp brush and carefully brush over that orange part of the landscape immediately below my sun. Then I'm going to use a clean tissue and wipe off across where I dampened and loosened up the paint. And what I'm doing is lifting off a bit of paint carefully and gradually, just to give the hint of a reflected glow, perhaps in a marshy pool just below the sun where it's setting. And I think that tiny little bit of subtle light lifted out there is actually making quite a bit of difference overall, without being overt. Always use a clean piece of tissue for this. You don't want to sort of smudge some of the darker paint into that lovely light area. So I'm going to remove the masking tape from the painting and have a look at it and see how it looks. The colours are a lot nicer in real life than they're showing here because, as always, my studio light is sort of bleaching things out a little bit. And here's the finished painting. Well, I think as another experiment, introducing another colour into this current palette that I'm working with, this time introducing light red along with the turquoise that I introduced in the last episode, I think I've got a whole new range of hues and tones that I can play with in future to give me some really interesting colours and effects. If we look closely, I think we can see some of those beautiful, gentle, soft mergings that happen as well when you allow your paper to dry naturally, and some of the lovely salt effects that can be created if you time it right. Basically sprinkling the salt into the paint when it's just damp. Too wet and it won't work, and too dry and it won't work either. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, because that really helps with our reach. So I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.